Welcome to Friday, everyone. And we're doing a slightly different schedule today for reverse engineering crime scene investigations with David Hawkins. We're making this program available not only on Patreon, but to all of our viewers on YouTube and Facebook and Periscope and elsewhere. David and I had to reschedule this broadcast slightly because we both have got some scheduling changes today from our regular show, and unfortunately David is not Friday, everyone, and we're doing a slightly different schedule. David's not with us yet, so we're going to wait for David. I know he was he was at a meeting. We had agreed to this time. He's obviously been delayed. Unfortunately, in the case of David's information, I frequently don't understand it until he explains it in some depth. And so without him here, I'm not able to go into too much detail, but of course today, David's going to be talking to us about the federal bridge. He's going to be talking about how a patent for a gyroscope that detects and can affect the yaw of a vehicle may have played a role in the death of Princess Diana, and how this same patented technology may in fact have also played a role on September 11th. I've got both. I'm not quite sure where David is. We can try him just by phone and see if we reach him. That might not be a bad idea. It's always something here. Let's just see if we can reach David on the phone. Do we have David ringing? I apologize, everyone. I hope David's all right. I'm sure he's just occupied at this meeting. David?
You have reached.
Oh.
Please leave your message.
Okay, so good thing it didn't. So that was David's cell phone. He's not answering. I'm sure he's just busy at the meeting that he was at, but this was the time that he had told me to begin. So, I don't know what to say. We're going to give it just a few minutes, and if we don't reach David, we'll just have to reschedule this episode for another time. Obviously, a lot of people watching the Kavanaugh confirmation, the vote thing that's going on today. Certainly want to give David a few minutes to get back to the computer so he can be on the show with us here. Again, there's not much I can really say about David's research until we have him with us. David has sent me up. I believe I just heard him join us. Here we go. Perfect timing. David is connecting as we speak. Hello, David. Can you hear me? I cannot hear you, David.
I'm here.
Okay, there we go. Very good. So, apologize for the delay there, David. Good to see you as always. Why don't we get underway? We're live right now, of course. And today's episode we are calling Princess Diana to 9/11, and you're going to be speaking with us about a yaw patent. I've got a bunch of material that you've emailed, David. What can you tell us about all of this?
Well, thank you, and my apologies for being technophobic. I was actually listening to you on YouTube and wondering why you couldn't hear me. I was looking blankly at it, but there it is.
There you go.
Senior moment.
No problem.
Yeah. So, what's intriguing about the crash of Princess Di into the 13th column of the road tunnel under the Pont d'Alma Bridge in Paris, which is a journey I used to make very often when I worked in Paris with this French company, Schlumberger, is that when the police and various witnesses capable of recognizing it looked at the marks in the road, there were no brake marks, there were only yaw marks. Now, yaw is, I believe, a term that ought to be familiar with you and your stereoscopic camera. I mean, presumably pitch, roll, and yaw. Is that a language that's familiar with you?
It is.
And it also applies to aircraft.
Yep.
And evidently, it also applies to the Mercedes 280, in which Princess Di was being driven by a chauffeur by the name of Henri Paul.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, that's the amazing thing about reverse engineering crime scenes, particularly through the patent office. You find out the device that is particularly relevant. Let me just turn that off, sorry. Is particularly relevant to inducing pitch, roll, and yaw remotely into a passenger vehicle. And that technology goes back to the late 1970s.
Really?
With the invention. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, no. I was just remarking the 1970s. That's interesting.
Yes, and the 1980s, where the technology of the QRS-11, the quartz rate sensor gyro chip, was developed by a company in Little Rock, Arkansas.
Whoa.
By the name of BEI Industries, that retained a law firm to broker the development of its patent and its applications of said patent. And lo and behold, they used one Hillary Clinton as their intellectual property lawyer.
Wow. I don't know if anybody knew that before right now, David. Did you just learn that recently?
No, it's Abel Danger has been publishing the analysis of the QRS-11 gyro chip used on 911 back to the time when Phil McConnell and I first started the discussion in December of 2006.
Huh.
Just to refresh, maybe your listeners or our listeners weren't aware of that. I had been on a coast-to-coast radio show on September the 11th, 2006, which I believe reached an audience of about 2 to 4 million people. Mm-hmm. And I was describing, I think I had an hour or 2 hours in great detail, my theories of how those planes were captured. And that triggered a whole lot of interest, including someone who knew Field and heard of me, put us two together. So December the 6th, 2006, I called Field. We had a brief conversation about his experience as a pilot, both military and civilian. And then he told me that, I talked a little bit about my theories of the 911 attack. And then he told me that he had a sister in Washington who he thought was a senior bureaucrat, but he didn't know a lot about her. And then I looked up her bio, and this woman is really quite astonishing. Because fast forward to the death of Princess Di on the 31st of August 1997, Christine Marcy had a most interesting job. She was the senior counsel for the detention and deportation program of the Immigration and Naturalization Service, and she was the founder of Conair in 1985, when I believe she stole money from the United States Department of Justice Asset Forfeiture Fund and bought a Boeing 727. Fast forward to December 1988, she called her brother, the pilot, Phil McConnell, and asked him how she should handle an aircraft during a prisoner mutiny. And wittingly or unwittingly, I think it would be wittingly or unwittingly, Field told her, well, you just drone the aircraft. Well, to drone an aircraft, meaning you fly it remotely, of course, you need something other than a human being between the flight control system on the computer and the waypoints that you're going to be dialing in to send that aircraft to its destination. And a crucial technology for that intermediate between the autopilot and the controls to the plane that control pitch, roll, and yaw is the QRS-11 gyro chip, which evidently had been brokered by Hillary Clinton into various facilities on the Federal Bridge, which I believe is on your wonderful schematic to the show today.
Well, David, whenever something like this comes up, I always like to question, how do we know that Hillary Clinton brokered this quartz rate sensor chip?
It's published. I think there's an article like 5 Degrees of Freedom of how the Clintons were basically in contact with everything corrupt in Little Rock, Arkansas, including various funding mechanisms. that transferred American technology to China and every favorite enemy of the United States. I mean, the Clintons have been treasonous for a long time, but there doesn't seem to be any attempt to hide the role of Hillary Clinton. Sometimes, and I think perhaps early on, we made the mistake of describing her as a patent lawyer. She's not a patent lawyer, she's an intellectual property lawyer in the broadest sense. Incidentally, so is Michelle Obama, which is kind of interesting. So companies that might want to get their technology used for nefarious purposes need to find intellectual property lawyers who can make an arrangement which is covert rather than overt. And of course, on that federal bridge, you will see the United States Patent and Trademark Office has an absolutely crucial role. So at about 6 o'clock below the federal bridge, you see the USPTO, right? And essentially what that means, any entity on that federal bridge, including Boeing, Lockheed Martin, Northrop Grumman, and Raytheon, that has people within it, embedded within it, who want to make use of a patent in the patent office, provided they're authorized so to do over the Federal Bridge Certification Authority, which unfortunately for America, the root authority is the United Kingdom Ministry of Defense, would allow you to clip the Boeing company autopilot technology to the USPTO and basically induce pitch, roll, and yaw into a Boeing aircraft, which of course is what we saw on 911.
So, David, there are some people who have said that the accuracy with which the remote control, I agree that the second plane for sure to hit the World Trade Center, having it be autopiloted, remotely controlled, that makes a lot of sense. We've seen quite a bit of testimony and even a video that shows the last 12 seconds of flight of Flight 175, alleged Flight 175, the aircraft that hit the building, makes one corrective maneuver and then hits directly in the center of the building. Now, many pilots have said that that type of accuracy is not consistent with human flight. Even for a very skilled pilot, there are constant micro corrections being made that would result in the plane not traveling on a mathematically perfect curve, but rather that type of flight is indicative of a calculated trajectory, an autopilot kind of a path. Then we've seen pilots, notably John Lear, saying that it's impossible to remote control such an aircraft. Now, I don't believe what Mr. Lear says to be correct, but how do we know that it was the Boeing uninterruptible autopilot that did this? There was an Air Force colonel or general who said that he felt the tube underneath the plane was a marker of some drone technology that he was familiar with from the military.
Well, what he might be described there is painting the target. So you can point a laser, for example, at Wedge 1 of the Pentagon. You could point it at the window behind which Captain Gerald DeConto, the duty officer of the Pentagon's U.S. Navy Command Center, which would probably be the most valuable strategic military target in the United States of America. And I puzzled myself over the collective brains of the senior brass of the American military that can ignore that was obviously a strategic target, but you could paint it with a laser. Let's say someone in the Sheraton Pentagon City Hotel who might have flown in the evening before could point the laser at that particular window, which is very important because whatever it was that went through that window obliterated all of the staff of the Pentagon's U.S. Navy Command Center, and damn it, American Navy was decapitated, Jordan. Jason, excuse me, it makes me mad that the collective military brains of America, and Field McConnell places a great deal of faith in his 4 Marine Corps generals surrounding Trump. And he and I parted company a little bit on that because I'm saying, well, how much more information do they need from people like me, who's not a military guy, and is just following, this patent office signature? How much more information do they need before they send in the Marines to the United States Patent and Trademark Office and arrest all of the Serco employees to whom the American government under the Clintons, I believe, outsourced the operation of the American Patent Office. It's absurd.
Well, what you're describing is, I think, strong evidence of a very high-level conspiracy to cover these crimes. But setting aside the Pentagon for a moment and focusing explicitly on Tower 2 of the World Trade Center, we've now seen video of a plane that does appear to be dark gray or black, as described by many of the eyewitnesses that day. And we've identified in at least 2 videos that plane is not being photographed in silhouette, but rather it passes through a column of direct sunlight that causes a specular highlight, a reflection off the front surface of the plane, meaning it's front illuminated and definitely a dark plane, not painted like a United Airlines plane. And I don't believe that a missile was fired at the World Trade Center. I do believe a missile was fired at the Pentagon, and I think that the hole in the Pentagon reflects a missile fire. The fact that it traveled through, was it 3 rings or all 5 rings of the Pentagon? Multiple brick walls of a reinforced concrete building. I think that a missile would do that. I don't think that an aircraft would do that. But likewise, on the World Trade Center, I think if a missile was shot at it, so close to it, it would fire right through the building and shoot way uptown, and we would have seen a missile come out somewhere. I believe the second tower was struck by a plane. I believe it was a military plane. And the question I'm asking is, how do we know that it was Boeing uninterruptible autopilot versus some other form of, I mean, I personally could conceive of a highly accurate technology for controlling a plane remotely, but we have all these people who are challenging the statements, and I like to go over them very carefully because there may be some of this that's correct and some of it that's incorrect. What do you think about that?
Well, I think you're right, and as I say to people, there's lots of values at a crime scene, and quite obviously that was a crime scene. You can talk about good and evil, right or wrong, guilty or innocent, or true or false, you see. And as an engineer, I'm particularly interested in this reverse engineering technique, where if I can simulate the response of putting a number of these patented devices and match that up with the signature at the crime scene, then I've got a balance of probability argument that the people who died at the crime scene died a wrongful death and there's a civil remedy. You see, the great strategic mistake, I believe, Americans, Brits, well, anyone in the free world, let's say, they think that they can apply the criminal law to these crimes that are so complex that I believe the average court or the average jury or even the judge, they can't make head or tail of it, you see. So, in fact, our audience, yours and mine, you just went through some fairly technical stuff and you used the word specular. Dare I ask how many people in your audience know what specular means?
It's a good point. A specular highlight is a focused area of light. Most people have seen this if they've looked at a pool table or a billiards table and see the white spot, you know, the highlight on a black cue ball or on any color pool ball, you'll notice there's a white highlight. Or if you look at a car with chrome on it, there are areas of bright glints of light. And that's called a specular highlight. And obviously, if something are in silhouette, if it were backlit, you're frequently dealing with this problem yourself, David. Sometimes when we come on the show here, you'll have this ceiling fan behind you illuminated. And because the light is behind you and lighting up the back of your head and the majority of the video frame, the video camera will decrease its sensitivity to light to try to adjust the overall exposure of the frame, and it will have the result of making your face look very dark. If the light behind you were bright enough, like if it were the daytime sky, your face may look completely black, although we realize that's not the actual color of your face. So when we see this plane approaching the building and it looks black, many people have explained it away by saying the plane is being illuminated from behind, so it appears to be black. But when we see that specular highlight on the front of it, that means there is a direct light source right in front of the plane, and the light that we're seeing reflected back at the camera is coming from the front surface of the plane. So it is not in silhouette. But we're getting into the weeds a bit here. I want to bring you back. We'll keep thinking about that, and as we discover new information, it's certainly totally reasonable for a hypothesis to evolve over time as we share information and debate and study and find new things. But let's get back to these BEI sensors and what role they may have played in the death of Princess Diana and possibly in the control of the airplanes. Now, this is a website for this company, BEI Sensors, the manufacturer of this quartz rate sensor. And so you're saying that this is in the vehicle. Take us through exactly what it is this technology does and how you have identified it.
Okay, well, thank you, Jason. So let me just make a generic comment.
Sure.
That what I'm finding with my colleagues in this business about communication is that I'm saying to them, the DNA of these mass casualty or high value target events, like mass casualty of 9/11, or high value target like JFK or Princess Diana, can be traced particularly or almost exclusively when there is evidence of spoliation and spin. Now, spoliation is at a crime scene, you find people removing evidence when it is manifestly a crime scene, right? And this certainly happened in the tunnel under the Pont d'Alma Bridge, with evidence that, including the Mercedes itself that was just taken away.
Really?
And for me, no proper crime scene investigation was made into that Mercedes. Spoliation is pretty evident. Spin is where you engage a system, for example, the social engineering protection appliance that's been patented by Kinetic North America, where they treat perhaps the truth coming out of your lips or my lips as malicious or criminal, and they purge it or filter it on the internet and allow the lies to penetrate into people's consciousness, so everyone believes that this was an accident, right? So let me summarize again. The DNA of these high-value target and mass casualty events, when there is evidence of spin and spoliation, can be traced back into the patent office. And the beauty of the patent office, when you go into the language of the patent office, it's very precise, very accurate, because the patent the person who is applying for the patent has to demonstrate to the patent officer, and unfortunately for the United States of America, your patent officers are employed by Serco, which is beyond absurd, but there it is. Maybe people will wake up down there eventually.
Now, David, let me pause you for a second, because I do want to dig in. I know I'm all over the place today, but this social media protection appliance, it's very important, and it's become more relevant for what you and I are doing, because there are some people in the social media sphere who have begun speaking about your analysis of the Federal Bridge, claiming that I have suddenly out of nowhere started speaking about it. Now, to be clear, I know nothing about the Federal Bridge other than what you've told me about it, and your analysis of it has been quite fascinating. It certainly raised my awareness of it, but there definitely seem to be people who are trying to convince others that you and I have some motive or some reason for discussing this Federal Bridge beyond our actual motive. Tell me exactly how you came to know about this Federal Bridge and why you feel it's so important to share the information with me and our audience about the Federal Bridge.
Well, I think I can go back to May the 1st, 2007, when I wrote a draft with or for Field McConnell, bringing a class action suit, so to speak, where Field represented himself, naming a number of people and identifying some of the communication systems that would have had to have been used to pull off the 9/11 attack. So I've always been interested in communications and to a certain extent encryption. And eventually, I can't remember the precise day, I just came across this term, Federal Bridge Certification Authority, FBCA. I started digging into that, and ultimately the schematic that is most revealing was not the one that we had been publishing at Able Danger, which was dated around the 2001 period, but although that was fascinating itself because the route authority for the Federal Bridge was held by the United Kingdom Ministry of Defence. But it connected in 2001 to Boeing, Lockheed Martin, Northrop Grumman, and Raytheon. So since the assets of those major defense contractors were used on 911, whether it's by Osama bin Laden or whatever, it was by someone, you have to look at the particular trajectory that was flown. And as you point out, with the second plane going into the second tower, it's a smooth transition as it changes course to hit the tower when evidently its previous course would have missed the tower. It would have gone off to the right. And there were no check turns in that. But let me just back up to the Federal Bridge.
Yeah.
So then I started looking at the Federal Bridge, and it was you, Jason, who discovered the 2013 schematic, about then, of the Federal Bridge. And I looked at it and my jaw dropped, because there on the, first of all, the Federal Bridge hub had split or bifurcated into two. So now you have the Certipath Bridge and the Federal Bridge. And the Certipath Bridge connects to these big defense contractors. And then underneath at about 3 o'clock or 4 o'clock, let me have a see if you've got that on the, yes, there's these big yellow blobs with NL MOD and UK MOD. And so I'm saying, well, what's the relationship between the United Kingdom Ministry of Defence in the big yellow blob and the United Kingdom Ministry of Defence over on the left, which talks of having the root key? And the root key is the key to the entire network. Whoever's got the root key can pretend to be anyone they wish. Now, I've seen a few references to say, that the Federal Bridge is just a means of hooking up credit cards. It's a lot more than that. And the Federal Bridge was actually used, and I'll repeat this, for the continuity of government operation on 911. The Federal Bridge Certification Authority, where the key, the root key, is with the United Kingdom Ministry of Defence, where the Defence Minister of the UK MOD, when little Princess Di was murdered in the Mercedes, was Nicholas Soames, the grandson of Winston Churchill.
Wait. Say that again. Nicholas Soames? Oh,
Nicholas
right.
Soames.
He was the Minister of Defense, wasn't he?
Yes, in 1997, and he had threatened Princess Di.
Whoa.
Right? Because he said she's interfering in where she's got no business on her crusade or attempt to stop the United Kingdom from exporting landmines. But there's something a lot more sinister than this, Jason. I think Princess Diana had discovered the existence of this pedophile psychopath network at the highest level of the United Kingdom and the American governments, dating back to World War II. No, I mean, she wasn't any historian, but she was a mother, and I believe a very good mother. And I think she discovered that her husband, Prince Charles, who had been consorting with Jimmy Savile, which is the British equivalent of Jeffrey Epstein,
right,
had probably fallen into a trap set by the psychopathic pedophile ring in the United Kingdom and the United States. But for me, I think in a nutshell, the Federal Bridge is the modern manifestation of the imperial brain. And the imperial brain was the name given to the instrument room of the General Post Office in the 1840s or 50s, which was full of instruments, Jason, that had been patented. And if you were inside the Federal Bridge, the imperial brain,
yes,
or had little telegraph boys running with news to your mansion in Harley Street or whatever, that the price of wool in Australia had gone up because all the sheep were starving because the rains hadn't come, etc. You could take a position on the international stock markets and you could get as rich as a Rothschild.
Well, information is power, of course. And just to take it back for a second, people who maybe don't know, I can't imagine there are many, but of course, Jimmy Savile was a very well-known BBC television personality, comedian in children's shows, but posthumously was found to be a pedophile, a necrophile, a totally sick and twisted, I mean, bizarre to the ultimate extent. And one of the most wicked humans you could imagine would go around doing sort of, you know, charitable things at children's hospitals, but he actually had other motives for being there, and he's linked to the royal family. So this is astounding. You're saying, and it makes sense that Diana would have discovered something about this. David, take us back a little, because I remember when I was a young boy, the royal wedding was a big deal. Wasn't Diana somehow outside the royal lineage or something like that? It was an unusual pairing at the time.
Well, it's amazing, and I'm not sure of my history, but I think Diana was a Stuart, right? And that's one of the lines of monarchy, and she was a royal. There's no doubt about that. But more to the point, I think she became an icon, right? She moved seamlessly through the royal family. But I think I sent you a link to a note that she'd written to a butler that was found in some safe of a lawyer, where she had a premonition that she was going to be killed because someone was going to tamper with her brakes, and she was going to get a head injury, right? Mm. And that's what is blanked here out. Well, now there's a number of names that occur to me. It could be Prince Charles, right? Mm-hmm. But you know what the name I think is? I think it's Nicholas Soames. Nicholas Soames is... Now, here's a classic example of what is spoliation of evidence. When there is spoliation of evidence like that deleted or a blocked out name, to me, that is indicative of the conspiracy that came together to kill Princess Diana and eliminate a possible witness to the existence of a psychopathic pedophile ring at the highest level of the British and the American governments.
And of course...
Now, what is she saying? She's saying, is preparing an accident in my car, brake failure, and serious head injury. Now, I've sent you, I think, a link to an excerpt about what happened to that Mercedes 280.
Yes.
No, I don't know if you can pop that up on the screen. But what happened to the Mercedes was it was stolen at gunpoint from outside a high-end restaurant in Paris, and it was returned in pristine condition around, I think, May the 6th of 1997. It passed its police examination, which is an annual examination, I think around in July. But the interesting thing is, it is reported that various parts, electronic parts of the Mercedes had been taken. But if you're going to steal a Mercedes, I don't understand why you'd steal the chip relating to the ABS system or the steering system. Anyway, net result is the vehicle was then taken to a Mercedes specialist repair shop, and for about $20,000, all of those electronic bits were presumably replaced. Now, my contention is, and again, this comes back to the beauty of the patent office, 2 or 3 days ago, I started Googling to see if there was any patented chip that might be able to hack into the steering and braking system of the Mercedes and put it through the pitch, roll, and yaw maneuver necessary to crash into the 13th column of the road tunnel under the Pont d'Alma Bridge. And you see, now, people might find this weird, but that club, you know, we've talked about this, you and I before, the White's Gambling Club, which is the oldest gambling club in the world, I believe. It was founded in 1692, 4 years after Lloyd's insurance market was founded in 1688. It had some very illustrious aristocratic members, but in modern day times, Nicholas and Rupert Soames are members of that club. And Nicholas Soames, I believe, through the club and its membership, were betting on the pillar which Mercedes would crash into. You know, wow. 13 is an unlucky number. Because remember that White's Club appears to have been operating various permutations of dead pool betting for hundreds of years.
Yeah. And of course,
and they
Nicholas
would
Soames.
Go ahead.
Well, Nicholas Soames is the guy that you've identified as possibly being the Mendenhauler in the case of Christine Marcy. Isn't that right?
Well, you see, you know, Jason, this is so fascinating because you know that I'm trying to develop a pitch for movies, but can you imagine a movie where people with your kind of skills mount a stereoscopic camera on the nose of a Mercedes, right, and run a simulation, which is exactly what I do with the deductive computing machine, of a device that is being driven by a chauffeur who's supposed to be drunk? Its pitch, roll, and yaw characteristics would be totally different to the pitch, roll, and yaw characteristics of a Mercedes driven by the gyro chip, because the gyro chip, that QRS-11, is refreshed 40 times a second. So you only need to make micro movements to induce a yaw, whereas an inexperienced pilot might make several movements over several seconds to induce a yaw in an aircraft. What I'm essentially saying, and Field introduced me to this technology, there are no checkpoints in the movement of the second plane into the tower. It did a smooth change where it banked significantly. And as I understand it, when a plane banks, a civilian plane banks, its nose drops because the lift from the wings drops. The second plane running into the second tower, its nose did not drop. That was under the control of a gyro chip. Now, so I find Micron Technology Inc.'s RFID system in communication with vehicle onboard computer US 6112152A, priority date 1996, 12/6, grant 2008-29. So this fits perfectly. If you go through the technology of the description of that patent, it fits perfectly with an induced yawing motion of the Mercedes that then crashed into the 13th pillar. So again, it comes back to this notion that you can find truth inside the patent office. And if you can match the truth of the patent office up with the truth at the crime scene, you've got yourself an investigation that is going somewhere, and not, I believe, almost criminally neglected by the administration of President Donald Trump, because he said there had to be explosives in that building. And of course there were explosives in that building. So where is his investigation? He's now been, president for well over a year.
Yeah,
the
almost
Marine
2
Corps
years.
generals around him, what are they doing? I mean, my brother has a military term for what they're doing, and it's not very polite. Over to you.
Well, you know what? In defense of President Trump, I would say there are indicators that he is, people like to say 5D chess. I prefer to think of it as a poker hand. And, you know, we haven't yet seen the turn and the river. The last two cards haven't been dealt yet. So President Trump needs to play his hand fairly close to the vest. I don't think he's in a position right now where he could just start opening an investigation into 9/11 and the Clinton Foundation and all this stuff. Perhaps there are things that he knows that will lead to an investigation of 9/11, but certainly you're presenting evidence right here that Hillary Clinton is directly involved with 9/11, and perhaps there is a sequence to what the president is planning. We can only hope. I'm still holding out hope that Donald Trump is carefully coordinating his prosecutorial strategy in coordination with certain things that he needs in place in his presidency before he can proceed. And I would think that having one of his appointments on the Supreme Court is one of those things that he needs to have in place. Avoiding impeachment is another thing that he has to have in place. And retaining control of the House through the midterm election is another. It'll be interesting to see how President Trump reacts after the midterm election. And of course, securing a second term would be another important thing. I've thought quite a bit about this, David. Maybe it's possible that the people that President Trump needs to fight against to prosecute these crimes are holding levers that might impact the president's ability to be reelected. Perhaps he's not going to be able to do this until he's at the start of his second term. So we're still holding out hope that something will happen.
Well, except that you're at war. I mean, America is at war with these forces, and you're giving, and I don't say you, but you don't give your enemy time or place to choose the battle, right? America, nearly lost its control over its sovereign state on 9/11, because if that fourth plane, which I believe was carrying this gyro chip, brokered by Hillary Clinton at the Rose Law Firm, if that fourth plane had hit the Capitol building. Now, what Field and I judge is that Flight American 77, flown by one of Field's former U.S. Naval Academy classmates, Captain Chick Burlingham, flew over the top of the Pentagon, and then it was that tight executed turn that took out the Pentagon. The fourth plane, United 93, was similarly equipped, but it left 41 minutes late. So, by the grace of God, I think we can say, United States was preserved in its present, and I'm going to be rude here, I guess that's my privilege, comatose state, because you haven't dealt with the crimes of 9/11, meaning the people who did it have been empowered, Jason. That is to say, they're sitting on the federal bridge, working out when and if there's a better opportunity to overthrow the government of the United States. And I'd like to come back to the psychopath network, right, that we're talking about.
Yes.
When Jimmy Savile and Jeffrey Epstein fly or provoke or induce or entrap senior politicians and leaders, they do it for a reason, and it's a very clinical reason. These people are psychopaths, right? They have no compunction or no empathy or no compassion for their victims. If you take Christine Marcy, in 1984, she launched two programs. One is the Department of Justice Asset Forfeiture Fund, where she used the money to buy the Boeing 727 to create the world's biggest prisoner transportation network. And the other is the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children.
Right.
Now, that's horrendous, Jason, because it means that there are evil forces in the United States who are tracking every kid who is available potentially to be kidnapped or tortured or murdered because their parents are in jail or dead or whatever. Now, how many thousands of children are on that database? So when Christine Marcy and Nicholas Soames and Jimmy Savile, who's now dead, or Jeffrey Epstein need a kid, well, they know where to go. They go to the Department of Justice.
Wow. Look at this number, David. I just went right to the website for the Center for Missing and Exploited Children, and the number of reports they've responded to just in 2017 regarding possible child sex trafficking is 10,093.
Right, and so every one of those kids potentially is available for the child pornography trade, right? Now, as I understand it, one of the targets for downloading child pornography from the enemy side is the Pentagon.
Right, there was an
Why
article
would they want to download child pornography into the Pentagon? Well, if you have a Marine Corps general, right, who gets hooked into this stuff, apparently it's addictive, you suddenly end up with the Marine Corps general potentially being blackmailable. And it could get worse than that, because once there's an appetite developed for watching this stuff, right, maybe there's an appetite for participating in the abuse of the child.
Well, isn't it also possible, David, that they're just putting this material on the computers to implicate people?
Of course, through the federal bridge.
Because I find it difficult to believe that dozens of people working at the Pentagon or any job of responsibility would do that. I mean, it's possible, but I mean, again, we see this with Judge Kavanaugh. Well, I'm just saying, it's the type of thing where the accusation is so horrific that merely making the accusation has huge damage to the accused.
Well, I think you're just showing an article about how the Pentagon has become a target for these kind of pictures. And the problem is with these various grades of pornography, if people sign in and get behind that, you have to declare you're over 18. I never go, if there's any website that says you've got to prove that you're over 18, I don't go there.
Yeah.
Because, with this, I don't really, even today, I could barely hear you because I was listening to the YouTube instead of the system that we're on now. So lots of people are technophobic and they don't understand. They download this stuff and it sits on their computer, and now they're potentially blackmailable.
Right. They don't even know it's there necessarily.
Right. Now back to Princess Diana. I'm quite sure with Jimmy Savile in that loop. Jimmy Savile was acquiring the most disgusting pornography and distributing it,
creating
through
it even,
BBC.
Right? He
What?
was creating it even, wasn't he?
In creating it, I think he had 504 accusations of abuse. He even went into the mental hospital and abused the patients there. He had a golden key or something. But to me, he had the same kind of privileges as Jeffrey Epstein. Let's not make out the Brits to be worse than the Americans in this. It's a standard and classical technique, entrapment, sexually. They call it the honeypot, but it's 10 times worse when children are involved. Right? Now, if you take the United Kingdom Ministry of Defence during the time when Princess Diana was killed, you've got what's his name now? Nicholas Soames.
Yeah.
Right? He's the Minister of Defence. He's threatened Diana, ostensibly because of the landmine. But Nicholas Soames appears to have been in Washington in December of not in December, in August of 1978, November of 1978, at the time when Christine Marcy was Mendenhall, and you and I had that discussion. No one seems to be able to come up with a definition of why she would have a Mendenhall's baby.
Is this Nicholas Soames right here with Diana?
That's her. That's him. Yes. And Nicholas Soames is a friend of Prince Charles. Now these are, we talk about crimes by association. That's why I like to get back to the patents, because, for example, the Jerome Lemelson patent, right, which is, let's see the proper title, Jerome H. Lemelson, Prisoner Tracking and Warning System and Corresponding Methods, US 605-492-8A. Jerome Lemelson got 605 patents, so he's obviously a patent troll. He's a crook. He's dead. Right?
What's the most number of patents any legitimate person has?
Well, he's way up there. Now, you go through that patent, and it's quite incredible, given my background of artificial intelligence and expert systems, because what it says is, in the patent that was granted to Lemelson, is that it's designed to track prisoners and upgrade their privileges or downgrade their privileges using expert system, artificial intelligence, or fuzzy logic algorithms. Well, hypothetically, and that's the beauty of playing with the patent in the patent office, you might have a pedophile in jail, like one of the Cray twins, who was given visiting rights in his cell. He was in jail for life. And there was a 14-year-old boy that became a pen pal and ultimately, I believe, was allowed to sleep with Cray while he was in jail.
What?
Right? So you have a jail operator. Yes, if you Google Reggie or Ronnie Cray and a little boy called Brad, you'll find a picture of Ronnie or Reggie, I forget which, with his arm around Brad, who I think was a 14-year-old boy. And this is when Cray is in jail for life. He was put in jail in 1969, and he was one of them died, I think, in 1995, and the other died in 2001. But the Cray twins ran a pedophile protection racket from the jail system, Her Majesty's Prison, since 1969, international. Yeah, there it is. Yes. Huh. So this guy, I think it's Ronnie or Reggie, he's in jail for life, and he gets visiting rights with this 14-year-old boy. I mean, this is obscene.
Where are the parents of the 14-year-old boy?
Well, they were dead.
Oh.
And I believe, you'll dig into that, his name is Brad. I think he was murdered.
The parents were murdered, or the kid was murdered?
No, I think the kid has been murdered.
Holy cow. And Cray is dead?
Both Crays are dead, you see. but I believe Jimmy Savile visited them.
Wow.
Right now, you take Jeffrey Epstein. He's flying the Clintons, the Bill Clinton 20 times and Hillary Clinton about 6 times on the so-called Lolita Express, where they're serviced by underage girls. They fly to Little St. James Island, and there was a recent report that the island had burnt to the ground. Well,
Oh,
Jason,
yeah.
how do you burn an island to the ground?
Yeah, you can't. I'm sorry to interrupt, David, but this article about young Reggie, or whatever the kid's name is, it's gone.
Brad is new.
Brad.
Okay,
It's
well,
gone.
now they're bleaching the internet.
Yes, I
So,
remember
anyway,
that
let me just
story
get-
about the island
Yeah.
burning down. It seemed weird.
Yeah. Let me just go back to why President Trump may or may not want to open the 911 investigation. I believe over the Federal Bridge Certification Authority, with the root key with the Ministry of Defense, they have a complete breakdown of all the children that are available to be kidnapped and abused, and the people who like to indulge in their fantasies with children. And that makes them blackmailable. So if you look at the people in, I don't know, Lockheed Martin, Raytheon, Northrop Grumman, and Boeing, well, on 911, the chief operating officer of the Small Business Administration that had, I believe, $70 billion loan portfolio and probably 300,000 small businesses under her bailiwick was Christine Marcy. Right? Now, those small business protege companies are owned by Chinese, Vietnamese, Irish, whatever, lesbians, blacks, anyone but a heterosexual white male in the United States. That is to say, these people were in the perfect position to launch a man-in-the-middle attack using devices such as the QRS-11 to put those aircraft through pitch, roll, and yaw maneuvers and take out key strategic targets in the United States, including the Pentagon's U.S. Navy Command Center.
Let's talk about that
So
for a
that fourth
second.
plane,
The fourth plane, say again?
yes, the fourth plane was 41 minutes late. Phil McConnell knows something about that, and he's not being coy, but maybe someone delayed it on takeoff from the tarmac, whatever. It was 41 minutes late. Had it left on time, its trajectory, I think, had already been written in through the autopilot and the waypoints, and it would have hit the Capitol building at the same time, possibly the same second, as the Pentagon's U.S. Navy Command Center. That would have decapitated America. There was a joint meeting of the House in the Capitol building, incidentally designed by Dr. William Thornton, the first superintendent of the United States Patent and Trademark Office, who in 1811 was approached by a John Hall, I think, asking if he could patent the rifle. And Dr. Thornton, who was an Anglo-American, said, well, it's already been invented. It hadn't, but that's by the by. However, if you add my name to your patent, I'll grant the patent. So it looks like the Anglo-Americans, the British, took control of your patent office back in the beginning of the 19th century.
And we're quite prepared to be bribed and engaged in corruption from what you describe.
Correct. And when the patent office was burnt down, I think in 1833 or 1836, the first 10,000 American patents were lost, but just speculation. What would happen if the British had actually taken the patents and the copyrights and the models and then burnt the building down? That would have turbocharged the Industrial Revolution, right?
In England, it would have. So let's come back to this federal bridge, David, because it's a document you referred to so many times, and the more you talk about it, the more sense it's starting to make to me. Of course, this video we were discussing earlier that attempted to somehow malign our discussion of this Federal Bridge Certification Authority and tried to minimize its importance, saying that it was like a credit card processing authority. But of course, David, if someone could inject themselves into a bank or the software that the bank uses to communicate, you certainly could take advantage of credit card transactions if you controlled the software and the keys and the passwords and everything that the banks were using to communicate information about credit card transactions. Isn't that right?
Yeah, absolutely. So you're in the position of the imperial brain on this baby. And what's fascinating, of course, is the 2001 incarnation had over on the right from memory, it had Citigroup and Wells Fargo. As far as I can see, the 2013 incarnation, they've removed those banks. So they're continuously trying to remove the paper trail or the digital trail that would allow people like you and people like me to get to the heart of the conspiracy, which I think Edgar Hoover described very subtly as the individual is handicapped by coming face to face with a conspiracy so monstrous he cannot believe it exists.
Right.
But what you're talking about here, I believe, is a pedophile psychopathic network that uses these devices as weapons to deliver complete control over the sovereign state. Now, do they have something on Trump? Well, Trump has had a pretty colorful past, right? He's built hotels and casinos. Now, he borrowed money through a cartel of lenders headed up by Citigroup in 1988. He gold-plated his toilet seats, right? I believe you flew on one of those aircraft, right?
Yeah.
So I don't know if you sat on a gold-plated toilet seat, but
Might have stood above it.
All right, but I mean, the point is, he was taking high rollers to various casinos. Now, the question I ask these casino operators or their junket pool operators is, do they or could they be operating dead pools? Well, absolutely they could. These people all around the world could be going to the 4-star and 5-star hotels and betting on the time of death or the body counts on 911. So where was Bill Clinton on 911? Well, he was in the Port Douglas Sheraton Hotel in Queensland in Australia, where it was the 12th of September 2001, which is why I believe you have on the date stamp underneath the photograph outside the Pentagon, September the 12th, 2001, and then you have 173719 as the time stamp.
Right.
And that would be the time at the Dubai Creek Sheraton Hotel in the Emirates, where I believe Osama bin Laden and his family were betting on the body counts.
Wow, that's amazing. See, I love it how the more you explain it, the more these pieces start to come together and make sense. And I mean, as you said with Sherlock Holmes, when you eliminate the impossible, that which remains, no matter how improbable, must be the answer. David, we've got just 2 minutes left in our abbreviated segment today. Of course, you and I are presenting it today on YouTube, on Gab, on Periscope, on Facebook, on VK.com, and of course normally our show is appearing only on Patreon, and I do want to encourage our viewers who are possibly watching right now on one of our other platforms to sponsor David by going to patreon.com/reverse-CSI storyboards. David's work is unmatched and quite unique in the industry, so I think it's very important that our viewers support David and keep him in a position where he is able to continue doing this and sharing this information with us, because it is fascinating. David, what can you say in closing, David, about someone who would go to such great lengths to try to convince people that even questioning what an infiltration of this Federal Bridge Certification Authority might do? You and I are simply examining the people that are a part of it, the groups that are part of it, what connects them together, the patented technologies they have access to. What do you think about somebody that would be trying to dissuade people from listening to your analysis of this Federal Bridge?
Well, I think there are probably a few nodes on the imperial brain. I mean, the crown jewels here, and it's not just the crown, and I'm sure the Queen has absolutely no understanding of this, but basically this is the brain that has administered the British Empire for, well, you can call it 300, 400, 500 years. I mean, the British East India Company is 1601, right? And that was the greatest company the world has ever seen, in modern terms. It was better, had faster ships than the Royal Navy, it was better armed, and it had 200,000 men under arms. And when Queen Victoria tried to dissolve it, all of these characters, some good, some bad, went into the British military, and some of them have bubbled up to the top of the Ministry of Defence. And I think Nicholas Soames is responsible for the wrongful death of Princess Di. I'm not saying he killed her, but I think he used the Federal Bridge to link up the various technologies, including the QRS-11 brokered by Hillary, and eliminated a possible whistleblower for a, let's call it a bisexual pedophile psychopath network that is the mens rea behind the Federal Bridge. Over to you.
Wow. It's a fascinating analysis as always, David. Thank you so much for joining me today. My brain is kind of steaming after we're done with these sessions.
Could I just interrupt,
Yeah.
Jason? So just imagine that you put your stereoscopic camera
Yeah.
on the nose of the plane heading for the Pentagon, and the nose of the Mercedes heading for the 13th pillar, and you simulate the pitch, roll, and yaw that actually fits the facts. I mean, that's the essence. That's the visual reincarnation of what I do with reverse crime scene engineering.
It's fascinating, David. Well, I want to wish you a pleasant weekend, and we'll be back, of course, next week only on Patreon. And people can normally see reverse engineering crime scene investigations with David Hawkins only on Patreon by becoming a sponsor at patreon.com/crowdsourcethetruth, or, of course, sponsoring David's Patreon page by going to patreon.com/reverse-CSI-storyboards. And definitely want to encourage our viewers to sponsor David. He's doing a ton of excellent work. David, thank you so much for joining me. I want to thank all of our generous Patreon sponsors, and I wish everybody a pleasant weekend. I'll see you tomorrow.
Thank you, Jason.